Paul wrote the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy when he was in prison. Timothy was Paul's spiritual son. And Paul really, really loved Timothy. And he was close to him, he trusted him. And Timothy was the pastor over a large church in Ephesus. And he was being faced in that hour of history with false teachers and people coming against him. And he was a young pastor. And Paul, as a good father, was giving him instruction. And in the book of 2 Timothy, he shares with Paul shares with Timothy about what he was going to have to do. He was going to have to learn how to stand. He was going to have to learn how to give and how to be kind and how to counsel. He gave him the principles of what it is to be a good elder and a leader are in the book of Timothy. It's very, very helpful for all of us to see what it is to be a man or a woman of God and have a good character. The other thing about this book, about 2 Timothy and Paul's relationship, and about Timothy and Paul's relationship, is that Paul was in prison. Now, and he knew that he was getting ready to die. So if you were getting ready to die, what would you want to tell somebody that you loved? What would your last words be to that person? Paul, as a good spiritual father, was giving his son instruction about what was going to come and how he could endure it and stay steady and not quit. Because in that day, many people that were leaders like Paul were pulling back. Where Paul was in prison because of what he believed, others were pulling back and shrinking back. But Timothy is not to be like that. And Paul was encouraging him, don't shrink back. Be a man of faith. Be steady. Be good. Be kind. And so I think that we learn from this how we ourselves need to walk in the days of confrontation, of trouble, whatever. We just need to, 1st and 2nd Timothy are excellent books to read on leadership and Paul's leadership over his son Timothy. Paul loved Timothy. He knew about his spiritual calling. He knew about his mom and his grandmother, and he knew them. We don't really ever, in order to know somebody's character and all that, you have to spend time with them. So Paul was close to Timothy and his family. So we can learn a lot from the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy and I call it Paul's farewell letter to his son. And so it's a very interesting book to read. Paul was interested in Timothy's life. Here he was in prison and he was getting ready to die. He knew he was going to die, and yet he takes the time to write this letter to his spiritual son. We can learn from that as mothers and fathers to be in the faith, that this is what we should do too. We have to be faithful to the Lord right to the end. Paul was faithful to the Lord in Timothy's life right to the end. The Lord with us. The other thing about Paul and Timothy is that Timothy trusted Paul because of Paul's tenderness and his kindness and his loving instruction. When you read these epistles, you feel and hear the tenderness of God's heart, of Paul's heart for them. And it's the same thing with us with the Lord. When we cry out to him and ask him questions, we're learning, we're making misunderstanding, we're being confronted, we don't understand. Our life of prayer with the Lord, it's relationship. It's relational equity that we have, and that Paul and Timothy had. Paul had relational equity with his son Timothy because he'd taken him up alongside of him, he pulled him up alongside, and he taught him many things and how to stand as a man of God, even though he was young, because he told him to stir up the gifts that are within him. Paul knew what was inside of Timothy. Jesus knows what's inside of you. Jesus knows what's inside of me. And so we can trust him, and we've learned trust between Timothy and Paul by just looking at their lives. It's a great example of leadership and relationship in the Lord.